if you could have what would be called like the Thomas Seagar protocol for ice baths. So like for like just a normal person, say me, 35-year-old male, like what would be the Thomas Seagar protocol?
Whatever protocol works for me is irrelevant for you, Mike. That I can tell you what I do, but that's me. My body and your body are different. Mm-hmm. And nothing matters more than your N=1 experience. This is something that I've changed about my science because, you know, I'm a engineering faculty member at Arizona State University. I got my PhD, I did my dissertation. I know how science works. And when you come at me with randomized, double-blind, controlled trial, and you got the p less than 0.1, I'm like, look, that's proof. But I don't think that anymore, Mike. I've changed my view. Because are you in the 99% that responded to the experiment, or are you in the 1%? You know, mm-hmm. There's nothing more important than what works for you. So I'm never going to be one of those guys, you know, on Twitter that says, there is no scientific study that says the thing that you say happened to you actually happened to you, so it didn't happen. Like, that's crap. What I do is I get up in the morning, I do 2 to 4 minutes at 34 degrees. Maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe nighttime works for you.
And better. Is that every day?
Yeah.
So you're 7 days a week, 2 to 4 minutes.
I've done probably more than 1,000 ice baths.
Wow.
And the funny thing is that according to legend, I should be dead. Because, you know, if you listen to Kelly McGonigal's got this great book, it's Upside of Stress, and it talks about hormesis. Your beliefs about stress are more important than your experience of stress. If you think the stress is good for you and going to make you stronger, then sure enough, it can. Kelly McGonigal says that the stress of an ice bath is so great that if you immersed your whole body in ice water, it could kill you in a matter of minutes. And this is why I say, I guess I'm supposed to be dead by now, Mike. Obviously, that's false. The ice bath that you choose is different than, you know, being on the Titanic and thrown into the North Atlantic Ocean. You're choosing to get in of your own volition. You're choosing to come out, and you feel wonderful because of what's happening to your nervous system and what's happening to your metabolism. Mm-hmm. So for me, the right amount of time is 2 to 4 minutes, and the right temperature is 34 degrees. I'm not normal. I'm tired of being normal. Because normal for a 52, well, I'm going to be 58 this year. Normal for somebody in his 50s like me is sick. Normal is being on 3 different prescriptions. Here's one for your blood pressure. Here's one for your cholesterol. You know, normal, I'm not interested. So I can't tell you what the right protocol for a normal guy is. What I can tell you is start out so that it is cold enough to make you gasp and stay in long enough to feel the shiver. If you do those 2 things, then you're in touch with your own body and you will find like the right pathway for you. You can go a little colder and a little colder and a little colder as your body acclimates. And then maybe the right protocol for you will be something like what I do or what Joe does or what other people who are ice bathing every day will do.
And are you dunking your head every day?
You know, not every day, but most days I do. I always breathe. I never hold my breath. That might be because I'm a wimp about it. But 11 seconds is the longest I've ever been underwater. And at that point, I have a panic attack. So I go under and I breathe out through my nose. I blow bubbles just like my mom, who taught me how to swim, you know, said I'm supposed to do. I try and keep the top of my head close to the surface of the water. But I really like the feeling of the ice water on my face. I feel like it tightens up my skin. I just like the sensation. And of course, I have a lot of magnesium in my water, Epsom salt, magnesium sulfate. I put about 6 or 7 pounds in mine. And I like the feeling of the salt on my face and on my skin because, again, it reminds me of a kid, being a kid, playing at the beach. So I dunk my head, but I don't tell anybody to.
Right, same. Yeah. And which Epsom salts, by the way, interesting fact, normal chillers, the salt is going to corrode all the piping. That's what I've heard anyway.
I've never tested that. The chillers they have a heat exchanger in them that's made of aluminum, and they pump the water out of the tub in through the chiller, they bring it into contact with the aluminum, and then they return the water back to the tub. Now, that's not the way we work. We have a filtration system, but instead of bringing the water to the cold, we bring the cold to the water. So we're constantly circulating the water through the filtration system, but the refrigeration coils are underneath the tub, and they're maybe 5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what extracts the heat out of the water. That's why the ice forms on the bottom. The chiller units are cheaper and easier to build, but they can't get as cold because you can't pump ice. So when the water comes into contact with the aluminum heat exchanger, a little bit of that aluminum metal will dissolve into the water. Aluminum's not good for you. I don't want it anywhere near my water. It's used in water treatment. They use aluminum sulfate to coagulate particles and clarify the water at the treatment plant. Then, of course, they add fluoride, and then they add chlorine, and they put it in the water distribution network so it comes out of your tap, and they tell you that it's safe to drink. That's normal. And I'm paranoid. So I don't drink fluoridated, aluminum-treated water. When the aluminum comes into contact with the water in the chiller, a little bit of that aluminum dissolves into the water. The worst thing that you can do is have fluoride in contact with aluminum. That will accelerate the dissolution of the aluminum into the water. So if you're using tap water and there's a little fluoride in there, it will interact with the aluminum. You can say, well, it's inconsequential, and it probably is. I just don't want it anywhere near me. Sulfate is largely benign. That is, the interaction between aluminum and sulfate, not that great. And this is why you can dissolve a hell of a lot of magnesium sulfate. But the forge that we make will take all the Epsom salt you can dissolve in it. I've done as much as 9 pounds, but we can dissolve more if that's what you want. The thing is, when you get out and, I drip all over my patio and it leaves salt stains behind on my patio, I'm like, okay, I have enough. I'm not running a float tank here, I have enough salt. But I can't vouch for what happens with other brands, their piping or their heat exchangers and that kind of thing.
I'm under the impression that they don't really last too long with the erosion from the salt because it goes through the whole system, and I hear it just wears it away.
Someday I'll test it.
Yeah, something I've thought. Like I said, I haven't tested it either.
What we never do is add chloride salts. I don't want them in the Morozko because I don't want chlorine anywhere near any of the people who are taking an ice bath. You can say, well, chloride, like in Dead Sea salts, you can say chloride is not the same as chlorine. And it's not. But because the ozone is so powerful, when the chloride comes in contact with the ozone, it can change the valence state of the chloride. It can make, instead of chloride -1 charge, it can make a chlorine molecule with a different charge. That's not what I want anywhere near my customers. And so keep the chloride salts out of your Morozko, not just because they're corrosive, although we make ours out of stainless steel. If you've got anything but the original Morozko forge, it's made of a stainless steel tub, and that's highly resistant to corrosion. If you've got the original Morozko forge that's made out of zinc galvanized steel, and the chloride will reduce the longevity of the tub, so that's another reason not to put it in. But mostly, I just don't want to mix the ozone and the chloride. I don't want the byproducts that will come out of mixing those two.
So, one somewhat debated topic in the ice bath world. Should you ice bath before you work out or after you work out?
Depends on what you're going for. If you're in training and you're trying to build muscle mass, if you're trying to speed your recovery after a workout, ice bath before. This is the counterintuitive thing. People who are listening to me and listening to Joe understand that pre-cooling will give you big gains. Andrew Huberman did a podcast with Craig Heller, who's a Stanford faculty member. He's done a lot on what's called per-cooling. That is cooling in the middle of your workout. And the principle is the same. You keep your mitochondria cool, you get big power boost from your muscles, and you extend your endurance. So if what you're going for is immediate performance or anabolic gains, what Huberman calls hypertrophy, that is growth of your muscles, if you're going for that testosterone boost, then ice bath before. But there are some special situations where you might want to ice bath after. Say you're a tennis player. You're in the middle of a tournament, and it's a multi-day tournament. Well, you know after you've just done, 7 sets and it's grueling, that you're going to experience that muscle soreness and you want to come back fast to performance level again. Ice bath after your exercise. Cycling can go on for days. Tour de France or whatever it is. You might use the ice bath after the strenuous exercise to reduce delayed onset muscle soreness and to bring you back to performance level because you're not in training anymore. Now you need the rapid recovery, the reduction of inflammation so you can get right back up to performance level. Sometimes other tournaments, golf. I'm trying to think of other special situations. I'll give you an example. When my son was playing baseball, we moved to Arizona. You got a doubleheader. It's 112 degrees out. He's a catcher. And of course, he's drinking a lot and he's dripping from sweat. Man, if I knew, I would have put him right in the ice bath between games, cool him down, get him ready for the next game. So for the most part, you ice bath before you exercise. Use the sauna for recovery after a workout. But there's some special situations where you want to come back to your performance level fast. The ice bath can help you with that.
That's great. So nuanced approach, but ultimately before if you're looking for gains, but recovery, get you back to baseline.
Yep.
The ice bath could really...
Guess what? There's no one right way to do it all the time. Yeah. It depends upon what your goals are.
Of course. And so let's say you're me and you plan on having a big anabolic workout. How many hours before I work out should I plunge?
This is an open question because nobody's ever really done that study, but the people who are direct messaging me, they're like, is a 20-minute gap okay? Is a 30-minute gap okay? And they feel like they're still getting the benefit. Sometimes they got to drive to the gym and they're going to do heavy weights when they get there, and a little bit of rewarming their limbs doesn't seem to hurt the benefit they're feeling in the gym at all. But here's what I suggest. Let's say you have your Morozko at home. It's in your garage or something. Do some squats. Do some pull-ups. Do some push-ups. Do some basic body weight. Do some lunges. Do some basic body weight exercises. Me, I like to get my steel mace out. I feel tough. I swing it around my head. It doesn't take a lot of exercise to boost your testosterone levels. So you can do a little bit of rewarming with some light exercise, and then you can go big. See if you get that 20 to 30% peak power improvement. See if you're able to do a PR, personal record, based upon your pre-cooling. And if you find that is satisfactory, but you don't need to get the testosterone benefits, you don't need a lot of exercise. In the Japanese study, they went on the stationary bike for 20 minutes. That's all it took.
What was the study?
This was a study, 1991 in Japan. And they wanted to understand the relationship between cold exposure and testosterone. So they did what everybody does. They got these young men and they gave them some exercise, and then they did the cold. And sure enough, their testosterone went down. When they do the cold after the exercise, testosterone goes down. Luteinizing hormone goes down. And for some reason, the Japanese in 91, they reversed the order. They said, first we're going to do cold stimulation, and then we're going to put them on the exercise bike.
Right.
Testosterone went up. Luteinizing hormone went up. They weren't throwing kettlebells around. They weren't doing deadlifts. They just went on the exercise bike for 20 minutes just to restore the circulation to their limbs.
Wow.
It doesn't take a lot of exercise to boost your testosterone levels.
Have you seen any studies about boosting testosterone levels for sauna after workout?
I have not. It's a really good idea. There are studies about exercise and then sauna for recovery. Now, I haven't gone deep into them, like I'm a cold guy, but Mike Mutzel is really good on this stuff. Mm-hmm. If you go on his YouTube channel, he'll read some of the studies for you. And sauna turns out to be a terrific way to recover from a strenuous workout. What nobody has done is ice bath, exercise, sauna. There's been studies of ice bath and exercise, which works great. There's been studies of exercise and sauna, which works great. And there isn't a single study of this sort of triple stack, ice bath, exercise, then sauna. What happens?
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from the people who are trying it.
Yeah, same. So then So of course, contrast therapy then is sitting in the sauna, then ice bath, then back to sauna, unlimited loop. What's your thoughts on contrast therapy?
The advantage to contrast therapy is that you get vasoconstriction in the ice bath, and then you get vasodilation in the sauna. Both the ice bath and the sauna are really good for your cardiovascular system. You can get your heart rate up in the sauna, for example, and that's like an exercise mimic. They're really good for your circulatory system. They improve circulation, especially in the extremities, the capillaries. But what you got to avoid is ice bath, hot tub. It feels like it's thermal contrast. You're like, hey, I'm doing cold, I'm doing hot. People don't understand the way the hot tub works, though. Your body knows when your skin is wet. In the dry sauna, you're sweating like crazy, and it's the heat of evaporation. So when the sweat evaporates off your skin, it takes a lot of the heat with it. That's how your body is designed to stay cool. When you get in the hot tub, your body understands that your skin is wet. There's no point in sweating in any part of your body that it's not going to evaporate. So in the hot tub, you'll sweat through your scalp, and if your arms are not in, you'll sweat through your arms. But everything that's underwater in the hot tub will not sweat. To defend your core body temperature and to prevent you from overheating in the hot tub, your body does vasoconstriction. So if you're in the ice bath for vasoconstriction, and then you get in the hot tub, you're getting double vasoconstriction, and you're missing the vasodilation benefits of thermal contrast therapy. I mean, you can do it, but it's not thermal contrast therapy in the way that we think of it for circulatory and cardiovascular benefits.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you're just not getting that pumping, and you're not really getting that blood flow that you get from a cold plunge. You're just cutting off that whole aspect of it.
But hot tubs, man, they feel great. So, I can't tell people don't do something that feels great. I'm in the business here of marketing a product that feels like crap. Like the first 30 seconds you get in there, you're like, what was I thinking? And then when you get out, it feels great.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, for me anyway, like hot tubs make my skin feel terrible. Like I feel like the pores are all open. I feel dry. When I get out of a cold plunge, my skin's tight. I feel electric. I feel like I'm aging in reverse.
In the hot tub, you can't disinfect the water. You can't sanitize it without chlorine. And this is why most of the boards of health require chlorine disinfection for public hot tubs. Now, they sell ozone units for hot tubs. The problem with ozone is it has a very short half-life. So it's highly reactive and highly unstable. It's just 3 oxygen molecules, but those 3 oxygen molecules will break apart into regular O2, and it happens fast. The hotter the water, the higher the temperature, the more quickly, that is, the shorter the half-life of the ozone. That is, the faster the ozone degrades back into oxygen. So to maintain an ozone concentration in the water has to be cold. Most of the ozone generators that are built for hot tubs, they don't work at all. I tested like 12 different varieties, and they were all essentially cosmetic. Like they weren't putting out the ozone that they advertised, and even if they did, at the warmer temperatures, the ozone wouldn't last. So we had to settle on one brand that was really freaking good when I was first testing it. Since then, they've improved, and a couple other brands have come in to make ozone because that works at colder temperatures. We get just enough life to the ozone so that we can keep the water from allowing infection to spread. Then we get super concentrated ozone at the point of injection so that we can deactivate Ebola virus in like less than a second with the ozone concentrations that we've been able to achieve. The EPA knows about this. Ozone has been used in water treatment plants in Europe for years. There's some water treatment plants in the United States that use it too. But they still add chlorine because they need that long-term residual. They need to keep the pipes disinfected. And ozone will degrade before it even gets to your faucet. That would leave the water distribution network vulnerable to an invasion of pathogens, and they can't have that. So I get why chlorine is in your tap water, and ozone never will be. But chlorine will never be in your Morozko because ozone is the ideal disinfectant for cold temperatures.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've just was not ready for and super impressed by with just visiting your facility is just how much you guys are testing ozone nonstop. Like it's like you're not even comfortable with your solution. Like you're just always finding more and more, and that's something that I was definitely not expecting. And one thing that I've also like noticed just being in the ice bath industry for as long as I have is that like everyone has their preferred ozone, and everyone says this one doesn't work and that one doesn't work. And you go on Amazon, there's like a $20 ozone, there's a $150 ozone. Yeah. So not all ozones are created equally. And I love that you guys are just constantly testing, running your own experiments, and just always just trying to make that better, because disinfecting a cold plunge is like one of the most important features of the cold plunge.
You want it sanitary. And it's true that as a first approximation, none of the ozone gen works. Like, we just threw 2 more out today, 2 different brands, and it turns out that they don't operate unless you keep the voltage like super precise. If you allow the voltage to vary, and there's going to be voltage variation. If the compressor comes on at the same time that the ozone comes, you're going to get a voltage variation. Or there could be a surge that goes through the circuit in your home. And if that fries the ozone, then it's no good. So the best ozone generator, if you got a hot tub or you're doing a DIY at home, is made by Dell Ozone. I know this because I've tested all of them. Mm-hmm. Dell Ozone's also the most expensive one. And it kind of makes sense. There are less expensive brands, and we would love to save a little bit of money, but we submerge them to make sure that they'll operate if they still get wet. We ensure that they cannot introduce stray electrical currents. We will make sure that if there's a backflow of water into the ozone gen, that after the water drains back out, the ozone gen will still work. And of course, we measure how much ozone they put out.
I've heard of people cold plunging and their testicles like shoot up into their cavities, sometimes get lodged up in there. Is that dangerous? What's your thought on that?
I don't know. That's not been my experience.
I know, me neither.
Right. I'm not a medical doctor, and I wouldn't know. Will you tell me, though, a little bit more about what you've heard? Like, you know somebody who went in the ice bath and then his testicle never dropped back down?
Correct. He had to, like, dislodge it back down.
Oh, wait a minute. He had to poke on it himself?
Yeah.
Well, then it did come down.
Well, it did. Yeah, it came down, but, like, it was definitely jarring to hear that it's a possibility that you could get in and your testicles could shoot up and, like, you have to, like, jar them back down.
I mean, I understand why men would be sensitive about what happens with their testicles.
Yeah.
And so I can see how that would feel like a bad experience. It's not been my experience. I haven't read any studies about it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
However, there's a lot of jokes about, the Seinfeld episode with the shrinkage and what happens to male anatomy when they're in the ice bath. There was this really funny, it was a catchy song called I Lost My Penis in an Ice Bath.
Yeah.
It was circulating around Instagram. It's pretty funny, but I couldn't repost it because my experience is different. Ben Greenfield wrote that an ice bath is like Viagra for your whole body. And you really got to understand the science behind it to understand where he's coming from. The endothelial cells that surround your blood vessels, they are responsible for making nitric oxide that will signal vasodilation in the smooth muscle tissue that will either cut off the blood circulation or open up the blood circulation. Vasodilation is essential to an erection because you've got to connect the penis straight up to the heart, increase the blood pressure in the penis to maintain an erection. So those endothelial cells that trigger the erection, they use mitochondria to make the energy to synthesize the nitric oxide that causes the relaxation in the smooth muscle tissue. Like this whole chain reaction. Erectile dysfunction is one of the first clinical markers of metabolic disorder. It means your mitochondria aren't working right. And so now a guy goes to the doctor and he reports he's having difficulty with erections, and the doctor's like, this is a metabolic disorder. It can also be psychological, but it's a clinical marker. Now the doctor has to test his insulin sensitivity, see where his metabolism is at. Viagra works by overcoming insulin resistance, not by healing your mitochondria, but by overcoming the insulin resistance in the endothelial cell that is actually trying to protect the mitochondria from further damage. Viagra it can work for women as well as it works for men. Women have erectile tissue. It operates the same way, but nobody really thinks about it because it's not essential to the sexual function of a woman. But this effect of overcoming insulin resistance works throughout the body. It can also be used, for example, to treat traumatic brain injury in infants because they need the additional circulation. They need the mitochondrial function for their brains to heal. So Viagra works systemically by overcoming insulin resistance. An ice bath works systemically by eliminating the insulin resistance, by stimulating biogenesis so it heals your mitochondria, so you no longer need to be insulin resistant. In this way, an ice bath will improve male sexual performance. That has nothing to do with where your testicles are, I suppose. It's just the irony of these jokes about, lost your penis. That's never happened to me. So I don't worry about it so much.
Yeah, same. And I obviously agree with what Ben says, that's literally like Viagra for your body. I mean, for me, that was like one of the first things, like if you were to ask me, like, why do you ice bath, as you actually did last night at dinner, I said, well, for one, makes me horny as hell. And that's just one thing amongst many. So
AJ made me promise that I would not do anything intentionally that would further raise my testosterone. She says she's tired. It's in a monogamous relationship, it can be hard for people to keep up. So sometimes I get text messages. Like I say, men don't talk enough about this, but there might be a guy a little older than me and he says, Professor Seager, I'm starting to get those nighttime erections again. Is that normal? And it's okay for him to ask. Darn right. On the one hand, it's not normal because guys your age are all sick. It's healthy, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
And most of the men are pretty happy with the results.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So I have seen you talk about cold plunging in regards to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. Topic that I love. So like in what respects do you think our hunter-gatherers would have cold plunged? Like I can't imagine they did it for the same reasons we are. Like I can't imagine our hunter-gatherers as biohackers, but maybe they were inherent biohackers where they went in the water, bathed in it, thought it was good. What do you think?
They didn't have to hack anything.
Yeah.
It was all there for them. They didn't have like heated leather seats and central air conditioning and things like that. Things just happened to them because that was the environment that they lived in. But it's a really interesting question. Why are our bodies, why do we respond so well to cold plunge therapy? And there are sort of ancestral origins of what happens to our body. It requires some thought. There's something, it's kind of a misnomer, but it's called the aquatic ape hypothesis. It has other names, and I should probably refer to it by other names, but it's this idea that human beings lived at the water's edge. And there's a lot of evidence for it. The aquatic ape hypothesis meant to explain these strange anatomical features of the human being. We share like 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees or bonobos. They're very close relatives in like a metaphorical sense. Why do our nostrils point down and theirs point out? Why are we practically hairless and they're covered with fur? There are good reasons for this, because when we dive into the water, downward facing nostrils keeps the water from going up our nose. Because we are aquatic creatures. Why do we have subcutaneous fat, that is fat right below our skin, and fairly high body fat composition compared to a chimpanzee or a bonobo, which is like in the mid-single digits typically?
Wow.
We are built to be in the water. In some cases, we have more in common with dolphins or whales or the manatee, with these aquatic mammals, than we have in these certain inexplicable anatomical features with chimpanzees. So this aquatic ape hypothesis, it's meant to explain why we have the anatomical features of aquatic mammals rather than land-based mammals. Here's the biggest, most important one. Our brains are larger, and it takes a lot of DHA is a good example. It takes a lot of these omega-3 fatty acids to make a big brain like human beings have. Where are you going to get that? You get it from the water. You get it from the fish. You get it from the shellfish. You get it from foraging in the water. The hunter-gatherer that we have like sort of in our mind, is maybe, in the Kalahari Desert, and they run down the antelope or the wildebeest or something like that. Because those are the societies that the anthropologists go to if they want to study, human beings in hunter-gatherer, nomadic lifestyle. But that's not the way it started out. You could say, well, the oldest fossils of human beings are found in East Africa. East Africa is on the equator. It's really hot in East Africa. How the heck could we be so cold adapted? And then remember, where does Wim Hof take his trainees? Up Mount Kilimanjaro. Where's Mount Kilimanjaro? It's in East Africa. It's right on the equator. Like during the Ice Age, the East Africa was covered with ice because of the mountains there. The human beings, and there weren't a lot of them, let's say 12, 15,000 years ago, Ice Age, there were maybe 10,000 human beings. It's called a population bottleneck. And they were all stuck between the glacier and the ocean. The waters that they foraged in were cold because they were melting off the glaciers in the mountain. Nobody who couldn't adapt to the cold water survived the Ice Age. And you say, yeah, but it's been 10,000 years of evolution, right? Like, what do we really have in common with our ancient ancestors besides, 10 fingers and 10 toes? And the answer is, we have mitochondria in common. My
answer is everything.
Right? I mean, we're anatomically not that different than the human beings that were here, in the genesis of time. If you believe in the Garden of Eden, then the waters that Adam and Eve bathed in were cold. And we have a lot in common with them. Not necessarily in our nucleic DNA, but in our mitochondrial DNA. Nobody explained to me in freshman biology that mitochondria have their own DNA, and you inherit it exclusively from your mother. That means there's no sexual reproduction of mitochondrial DNA. That means that I have the same mitochondrial DNA as my great-great-great-great-grandmother did. Now, there are mutations, and so there are certain haplotypes. But because the mitochondrial DNA evolved much more slowly than the DNA in the nucleus, we have a hell of a lot more in common metabolically with the ancestors that survived the Ice Age than we might think. Our bodies are built to expect cold water immersion. And if you don't get it, it's no wonder you lapse into a state of disease. Cold water is like sunshine and exercise. It's what your body is built for. You got to give your body the things that it's built for. And you could say, well, all that sounds a bit far-fetched. And then I got to ask you this. Why are human babies born with an instinct to swim and not walk? Because, you've seen National Geographic, and the baby giraffe falls out of its mother and then is running around in the grass 2 minutes later. They have an instinct to run, to trot. For us, it would be walking. But babies don't know how to do that. It takes months for them to learn how to even crawl, right? And after that, tentative steps. Maybe they're a year old. But human babies are born with an instinct to swim.
Yeah.
Why would that be? Because they were born in the cold water. Because our ancient grandmothers would seek out the relief of a water birth. And when that baby comes out in the water, it's going to find its way up to the surface. That's how it stayed alive. We are aquatic creatures. We're just so far from the water, which is really our origin. Yeah, the hunting and the gathering is important because we needed those food sources back then. But it's the human birthing in the water that I think really goes to our deepest, most instinctive responses.
Born in the cold.
Yeah.
And I have also heard that when babies are born and they're attached to the umbilical cord, they don't even need to breathe. They can get the oxygen through the umbilical cord. So they can actually be in water for a while, and that's what happens with home births all the time. So that's, I guess, based off what you're saying, it's almost very possible that the babies were submerged in cold for even longer than maybe we think.
I don't know how long
they wouldn't have kept them down
mom,
there.
Right?
But they can get oxygen through the umbilical cord.
For a while they can.
Yeah.
There is a story John Huntsman was an entrepreneur. One of the things that he invented was the clamshell fast food container, that got a really bad environmental reputation. But he was an entrepreneur in chemicals and the chemical industry. He's from Utah, and he wrote a book. His beginnings were very modest. So this is an autobiographical tale of his life. He worked in the Nixon administration. He faced bankruptcy a couple of times, and then he made a fortune and endowed the Huntsman Institute at the University of Utah, which is dedicated to researching cancer. So I'm reading his book because I care about cancer, right? And a couple of my friends who live in Utah recommended it to me. And right in the beginning, he talks about when he was born. He wasn't breathing. When the doctor, and he was born on like the edge of the Native American reservation. There was a doctor and there was a midwife. And this was like, this is almost 100 years ago now. So you got to imagine the medical equipment that they had. It was none. He wasn't breathing. And so, you slap the baby on the butt or something, you see if you can like bring the baby to life. Didn't work. The doctor gave up on the baby because the doctor had to attend to Huntsman's mother and try and save her life. This was a difficult birth, but the midwife is there. And so the midwife took John Huntsman Sr. and brought him to the kitchen. They had just had plumbing installed, right? And how did she bring this baby to life? Contrast therapy. She alternated him between hot water and cold water. Wow. Until he came to life and began to breathe.
Wow. It's almost like CPR.
Right? I mean, you're not forcing air into the lungs, and I don't really understand the mechanisms, but the way that Huntsman explained, the story of his birth as it was told to him it was the thermal shock of going back and forth between the hot and the cold that brought him as an infant to life.
Wow.
Huntsman, later on, he's diagnosed with prostate cancer. And he tells a usual story of, so glad he, got it caught early, and early detection leads to better survival. He had his prostate removed. He talked about some of the side effects: incontinence, erectile dysfunction. And of course, he gave $1 billion to the Huntsman Institute to research cancer. What he forgot was the health that this midwife's wisdom had when he was born. And I wish I could go back in time. I didn't know, I've never met John Huntsman. I don't know who he is. He's passed on now. But I wish I could say to men who are facing that, try the cold water first. You don't have anything to lose. It, brought Huntsman to life when he was born. I wish that he had tried it when he was older and he had this cancer diagnosis. Maybe it would have been the right thing for him then too.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's a story, right? And nothing matters more than what has happened to you.
So Gary Brecka went viral a couple months ago. He was talking about how people who do ice baths underwater and they put the straw up through the ice so that they can be in the ice water for extended periods of time. And Gary was sort of saying that the brain is not really protected by fat, it's just really the skull. So he was sort of saying that cold water immersion could be dangerous for your brain if you're underwater for too long. What are your thoughts?
I don't snorkel in the ice bath, although I did try it once. And I had an extreme emotional flashback. It was only 50 degrees, and I can stay in 50-degree water for what feels like indefinitely. So a friend of mine said, well, you should try a snorkel. So he gave me one. And I went underwater, and I'm breathing through the snorkel like I used to do as a kid. But I had this memory of being at Children's Beach and my mother teaching me how to swim, and her teaching me how to back float and then dead man's float with my face down. And I don't know, it just brought up so many childlike emotions. I couldn't stay in there. The ice bath is really good for your brain, but when you do it in short periods, that is, don't go brain freeze yourself. There are some good studies on the metabolism of the brain. When you improve your insulin sensitivity, Chris Palmer wrote a whole book on the brain metabolism called Brain Energy and mental health. When your brain's getting the energy that it needs, it can lift your mood. It can give you the energy you need for cognitive reframing or to make your therapy useful. It can resolve depression and other mental disorders. So Chris Palmer's really the expert on metabolism and mental health. But there's some other good stuff on how improving your metabolism can reverse cognitive decline. Another thing that Gary Brecka says is that Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. And he didn't make that up. Alzheimer's dementia originates in metabolic disorder. And then I got a message from a guy who's on Instagram. He's an opera singer. And he says he uses his ice bath to improve his practice. He will go through his practice. Look, opera's all in a foreign language. He needs to know what the words mean, not just how to sing them. So he's got to learn the music. He's got to learn the lyrics. He's got to learn the blocking. And he's got these intensive practice sessions. And then he hops in the ice bath. He says it improves his memory. So I had to look that one up. And sure enough, there's some good science behind how you can get the cognitive boost by doing an ice bath. But he doesn't go all the way to brain freeze, and he doesn't snorkel while he's in the ice bath. So I don't know Gary. I've never met Gary. I haven't seen the video that you're talking about. I know that when you go up to your neck and you improve your metabolism, increase your insulin sensitivity, you also activate your brown fat. And brown fat is more than just for non-shivering thermogenesis. Brown fat is also an essential secretory organ. Brown fat will convert T4 to T3. T3 is the more active form of thyroid hormone. Brown fat is in constant communication with your thyroid to regulate your metabolism. And brown fat will produce something called brain-derived neuroprotective factor. It will produce FGF, fibroblast growth factor 21. These are neuroprotective factors that will help keep your brain from experiencing damage and bring your brain back if it has been damaged. So a short-term ice bath, remember I only do 2 to 4 minutes, is a really good thing to do for your brain. I don't know anything about the snorkeling with a straw or something like that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can't see how it could be good, but
there's probably a lot of things that you could do in an ice bath that aren't any good. Yeah. But I'm not fooling around with those. I don't know what they are, and I haven't tested them.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will overdo it. One of the risks that people talk about is hypothermia. Rick Rubin went on Joe Rogan, and he said he did 30 minutes in freezing cold water. And Joe's like, weren't you afraid? And Rick Rubin's, no, because he kind of built up to it. Joe goes, but why would you do that? And Rick says, well, it was COVID. It was something to do. It's not dangerous. The world record for being immersed up to your neck in ice cubes is like an hour and a half or something. Wow. It takes a long time for hypothermia to set in. And I'm not suggesting anybody go for a new world record. I'm saying 30 minutes is probably overdoing it, but it's not dangerous. You can re-warm. Get yourself a blanket. Get yourself a sauna. If you live in Phoenix like I do, park your car in the sun. It'll be up to 180 degrees in the parking lot before you know it. Just sit in the warmth if you happen to overdo it. When you come back, when your core body temperature has come back and the circulation is restored to your limbs, you're going to sleep great.
So I guess pretty much last question. So this one's for the haters out there. Steelman the argument for who shouldn't ice bath.
The number one most important contraindication to the ice bath is not wanting to do an ice bath. The people who should not ice bath are the people who don't want to do it. So let's get that out of the way. There's no coercion, no bullying. I don't care if Jocko Willink calls you up and says that you're a bitch because you won't get in or something like that. Tell Jocko that you don't feel like it. And that's not Rogan's approach, and you're probably not going to get that phone call from Jocko, but I'm not here to shame anybody or bully anybody or coerce anybody into the ice bath. David Goggins, he might be the toughest man alive. He's got all the willpower in the world. He also suffers from Raynaud's syndrome, and he just posted this on Instagram where in Raynaud's, it's an interaction between the psychological and the physiological. It's an overreaction to the cold, and it's vasoconstriction in the extreme. So you get no circulation in your fingers. And he posted a photo of his fingers, and they were chalk white because there was no blood flow. If you don't want to get in the ice bath, then don't. And don't let anybody talk you into it. Now, sometimes it helps to have a guide or a coach or a little encouragement. Joe says he's going to kill his inner bitch and he's going to get in. When Goggins was on the Huberman podcast, Huberman said, when you do the things that you don't like, that are really hard, it grows a part of your brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And that part of the brain, Huberman says, is the seat of the will to live. So you can build up your willpower. I'm not saying, you might hate ice baths, but do them anyway. And good for you. Just don't let anybody talk you into it, because it kind of takes away from that feeling of accomplishment, that feeling that I did something hard today, that will build up your willpower because you've accomplished something. That's number one. Number two is hypertension or high blood pressure. Here, I've read and heard of a couple or three reports of people who have been hypertensive and had a really bad reaction to the ice. Now, this is a medical contraindication. When you put your whole body into cold water, vasoconstriction in your limbs will force the blood into your core and up into your head because your head isn't cold. This increases your blood pressure. You've decreased the volume that your blood has to occupy inside your body, and the pressure goes up. If you're already hypertensive, then your high blood pressure could go up too high to the point where you have an acute episode. Don't do it.
What was that?
If you already are hypertensive, so you have high blood pressure before you do the ice bath, the increased blood pressure that you experience while you're in the ice bath could put you into an acute hypertensive attack. So you got to watch your blood pressure if you know that it's already high. Start at a temperature that isn't so cold. Yeah. Go more gradual. There are other contraindications. One of the best sources for this is a book written by a French gastroenterologist. Hardly a bestseller. I found it on Amazon. I think it's called Cold Water Swimming. So he's a physician, and he'd been swimming in the Mediterranean for 20 years. And he talked about, over the 20 years, what are some of the medical reactions that he's seen. The only super serious one is this hypertension, this excess blood pressure, this high blood pressure reaction. But there are some other ones. There's a lot on Wikipedia about heart attacks. And most of it comes from the research out of University of Portsmouth, Mike Tipton. He's got what's called an extreme environments lab. He's got a huge cold tank, and he can study cold exposure. He really cares about drowning. And so he's published some papers, which I've paraphrased because most of his stuff is behind a paywall, about some precautionary protocols. If you're worried about heart arrhythmia, heart attack, breathe. Go in feet first instead of face first. Don't immerse your face. This is going to give you some dive reflex and some gasp reflex at the same time. Go in feet first and allow the gasp reflex to subside and your body to go into dive reflex. And this will bring your heart rate down. The dive reflex slows you down. It strengthens your parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the rest and digest division of the central nervous system. Whereas the sympathetic, that's the gasp reflex. That's the fight or flight. So Tipton's got some good advice on how to keep yourself safe, take care of yourself when you're going into the cold water. The rest of the stuff that you read on Wikipedia about the dangers are grossly exaggerated.
Cool. I think that's great. Tom Seagar, where can people find you?
I'm at morozkoforge.com. Everything in the book is already published for free on our website. I'm a professor, and so I'm like, knowledge should be free. I already get paid a salary. You can read all the articles. But people really wanted the book because they wanted it like in one place without the repetition, in a format that they could write in. So you can go to morozkoforge.com. We have a few copies of the book left, like 50 of them left. You can find it in the store, and you can buy it at pretty much our cost, which is $30. Shipping is free. You can find me on Substack, where I write on a lot of different topics besides cold. Seager TP on Twitter, on Instagram. I'm one of those guys that doesn't hide very well.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
This is the Cold Plunge podcast with me, Mike Gorman. Be sure to check out the video version of this podcast on our YouTube channel and check the show notes for any references, studies, or links to anything I spoke about on our website at plungereviews.com/podcasts. If you have a question you want answered or comment about the show, feel free to reach out in our official Facebook group, which is called Cold Plunge Community.